It begins with a blinding light. That's how most stories about the atomic bomb begin. But for Tsutomu Yamaguchi, it didn't end there. He was a 29-year-old engineer for Mitsubishi, a soft-spoken man with a young family, a good job, and nothing resembling what you'd call a death wish. On August 6, 1945, he was just finishing a 3-month business trip to Hiroshima. That morning he woke up early, walked through quiet streets lined with wooden homes and paper windows, and prepared to board a train back home to Nagasaki. But the universe, or fate, or chaos, had a different itinerary for him. At 8:15 a.m., just as he stepped out of a tram and looked up at the clear sky, he saw something hovering in the distance, a single aircraft. That's when he noticed the object falling. It looked small, almost delicate. Then came the flash, and then came the wind. The blast threw him backward, ripping apart the air, the street, the sky itself. 1 second there was Hiroshima. The next there wasn't. The bomb, codenamed Little Boy, exploded with the force of over 15,000 tons of TNT, instantly vaporizing over 70,000 people. Skin melted, bricks turned to dust, shadows burned into walls. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, standing just 2 miles from ground zero, should have been one of them, but instead he was thrown into a ditch. His face was burned, his eardrums ruptured, his arms were shredded by glass and debris. Somehow, despite the radiation, the chaos, the firestorm, he got up. He stumbled toward the ruins of the Mitsubishi offices, found 2 of his co-workers still alive, and together they made it to a bomb shelter. He stayed there overnight, dazed, wounded, and in shock, listening to the city burn. But here's where the story starts to twist into something stranger than fiction. Something that even the darkest war novels wouldn't dare imagine. On the morning of August 7th, barely 24 hours after surviving the unthinkable in Hiroshima, Tsutomu Yamaguchi made a decision that would forever seal his place in the pages of impossible history. With his body wrapped in makeshift bandages, skin scorched and blistered, ears still ringing from the concussive roar of the atomic blast, he limped through the scorched streets of a city that no longer looked real. All around him was ash and silence, burned shadows on walls where people once stood. And yet, with unimaginable resolve, he found his way to the train station. Yes, a functioning train station in the smoldering aftermath of nuclear annihilation. Somehow the rail lines were still intact. The trains were slow, filled with the wounded, the lost, the stunned. No one spoke much. He rode for hours, head bowed, clutching his burned arms, breathing through lips cracked and dry from radiation. He was going home, back to Nagasaki. When he arrived late that night, he collapsed into the arms of his wife and infant son. They were alive. In that moment, there was still some small mercy in the world. His wife wrapped his injuries with clean cloth and gave him warm miso soup. He told them everything, about the sky splitting in half, the blinding flash, the people screaming and vanishing into dust. His voice shook, his hands trembled, but even in the quiet safety of his home, he couldn't escape what he had seen. And then, almost impossibly the next morning, August 9th, Tsutomu Yamaguchi got up and went to work. Bandaged, limping, traumatized beyond words, he walked through the gates of Mitsubishi's Nagasaki office, exactly as he had done for years before the war. His co-workers were stunned to see him, but when he tried to explain what he had witnessed in Hiroshima, the total destruction of a city by a single weapon, his superior interrupted him. "You're exaggerating," his boss said flatly. "No bomb can do that." The other workers whispered behind their hands. Some laughed nervously. A single bomb could not turn a city into ash. It was scientifically impossible. Until just a few hours later, Nagasaki's sky began to glow. At exactly 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, barely 3 days after the unimaginable horrors of Hiroshima, the second atomic bomb was unleashed over Nagasaki. Tsutomu Yamaguchi had just finished recounting the devastation he had witnessed in Hiroshima to his skeptical manager. The room was thick with disbelief and tension. His words seemed almost like a fevered nightmare to those who had yet to experience it themselves. Then, without warning, the entire office was flooded with a blinding, unnatural light. The walls shook violently as a monstrous roar echoed through the sky, drowning out every other sound. Outside, a towering mushroom cloud spiraled upward, blackening the heavens as if the sun itself had been swallowed. This bomb, known by the ominous name Fat Man, was even more devastating than the first. Tsutomu, already burned and bandaged, his body still fragile from the horrors he had barely survived, found himself once again within 2 miles of the epicenter. The explosion shattered every window in the building, sending shards of glass flying like deadly needles. The very walls buckled and cracked, collapsing with terrifying force, while terrified office workers were thrown violently across the room. But unlike the first time, Tsutomu's body reacted instinctively, a deep survival instinct born from sheer terror and experience. Without hesitation, he dropped to the floor, pressing his body low and tight, his arms instinctively covering his head. He clamped his hands over his ears, trying to block out the piercing scream of the blast that seemed to tear through the very air. The world spun and cracked around him, but somehow, against all odds, he survived the second apocalypse. Again. This time he crawled through the ruins to find his wife and son. Their house had collapsed. Fires had started, but by some miracle, perhaps the only one in this entire story, his wife had taken their baby and gone out to look for burn ointment. They weren't home when the bomb hit. They survived too. The days that followed were a nightmare. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Water was poisoned. Corpses piled up in the streets. Black rain fell from the sky. The smell of death clung to every breath. Yamaguchi's wounds worsened. His skin turned black with infection. His hair began to fall out. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely speak, but he lived. When Japan surrendered days later, Yamaguchi and his family listened to the emperor's speech on a battered radio. Sitting in what was left of their home, silence followed. But the silence didn't bring peace. Radiation sickness would haunt him for years. His co-workers died. His friends vanished. He lost hearing in one ear, and he watched helpless as Japan was transformed, not just by defeat, but by an invisible poison that would seep into its soil, its people, and its memory. For decades, Tsutomu Yamaguchi told almost no one what had happened. He lived quietly, taught school, and raised his children. But later in life, he decided to speak. He gave testimony at the United Nations. He met with survivors. He wrote poetry about what it felt like to see the world end twice. He didn't hate America. He didn't rage against war. Instead, he begged leaders to understand what they had done, what nuclear fire really meant, and why no one, no city, no child, no soldier should ever see it again.